As Reverend Krista said, last week we began a different Lenten emphasis, not one of fasting, but one of fastening. Reverend Krista and I had spoken the week before about the fasting that had begun with COVID lockdowns 1 year ago. Darn, haven't we fasted enough, said we. So we wanted to lean not too awfully far from our liturgical and lectionary roots, but we wanted to choose some favorite gospel readings that have fed our souls over the years and that would fasten us as a congregation to some positive inward looking, both personally and congregationally. So I chose my favorite, the feeding of the multitude. In 1964-65, I was a completely overwhelmed freshman at Moyer College in Syracuse, New York. My first year English class was taught by the head of the English department. Dr. Novelli was a short, almost gnomish-looking fellow. To me, he looked like he was afraid he'd be attacked at any moment, but really he was a kind and gentle teacher and advisor. One day, our reading for discussion was the short story The Fox by D.H. Lawrence. So Dr. Novelli asked for thoughts. The typical freshman response, nothing, because we were not yet used to the idea of being asked our opinion. But after all, it was a story of a fox. How was that interesting enough to talk about? So the class hummed and hawed through several minutes of saying nothing, when a junior, certainly misplaced in our class, spoke up. He told the understory of the fox. We freshmen, including me, just looked at him as though he was nuts. Then we looked at Dr. Novelli, and he nodded that, indeed, the smarty had it right. The understory was the most important story within Lawrence's short story, although the top story was also perfect all by itself. I have never thought about reading and what it tells me, or may tell me, ever in the same way. I was never quite so naive again. For our whole lives, you and I have heard, in some context or another, the story of Jesus feeding the multitude. Often it is used as a metaphor for a spontaneous outpouring of sharing or for providing for others. The four versions of the gospel, Matthew, Luke, Mark, and John, each tell the story a little differently. This past Thursday, St. Paul's Parish Bible study took on all 5 gospel readings of the story. Matthew actually tells the story twice, and we covered them all by detail. Here are some of our discoveries. The numerals 7 and 12 are prominent. 7 as in 5 loaves plus 2 fish, kind of 7, or 7 baskets of food left over in one story, and also 12 baskets of broken pieces left in 4 of the stories. In the Bible, the numeral 7 means a complete series, like 7 days of the week. 12 denotes a complete cycle, like 12 moons of a solar year. So 7 and 12 are clues for enough or completedness within a detail of a story. Another thing we discovered, in 4 versions of the feeding, the multitude story, the location is a desert place or desert where they congregate, indicating a desolation or wanting setting for the story. John only goes to a green place, and one of the others to both places, moving from desert to green. Always Jesus asks the disciples or a disciple what is available to eat. He engages the disciples in the miracle of meal. Always there is a sitting down, sometimes in numbers of 50, sometimes 100, sometimes not divided. But they sit down. This was to be a meal to be shared. Always there are 5 loaves and 2 fishes. One time the loaves are specified as barley loaves. One time a boy has them. Always Jesus blessed and broke or blessed and gave thanks for the bread. Always Jesus asks the disciples to feed the people, to distribute the food. Jesus does not take part in the distribution. 4 times there are 12 baskets of leftovers, once 7. In one version, there are 12,000 men plus women and children. Another, just a crowd. And another, 4,000 men. For 3 tellings, there are 5,000, but always a lot. And in every telling of the story, all that were fed were satisfied or had their fill. What we found on Thursday was not just the familiar story of Jesus feeding the crowds, but Jesus blessing the bread, then commissioning his disciples to feed the people, to provide for the crowd until each person was satisfied. So satisfied, in fact, that there were enough baskets left that each apostle might have 1 basket each. Each apostle could go out and feed others from his own basket now, from his own plentiful personal basket of bounty. The overstory is a story of a crowd being fed. But the understory, we discovered, is of Jesus providing his apostles the authority to go and feed the people beyond that one event. One year, just before Thanksgiving, in my anticipation and excitement for the holiday, I asked my father, "Can we eat all we want?" It wasn't like we were ever without food. We were always fed, but we also were reminded that we're 6, then 7, 8, 9, and so on, other mouths to be fed as well. I think my father was taken aback by my question, but he assured me that yes, we could have as much as we wanted. Certainly good news to a greedy gut like me, but mostly because it added to the fun of the holiday. We were free to indulge ourselves this one day. We would be satisfied, and there would be enough and more than enough for everyone. Much like the people who were blessed to be at that deserted or that green place with Jesus and his disciples that feast day 2,000 years ago. I believe the feeding the multitudes miracle story is a wonderful first level or overstory, like we Lemoyne freshmen thought was the only Lawrence short story over 50 years ago. But I think the real miracle story, the one underneath, like the one Smarty Jr. found in the fox, was the commissioning of the apostles and disciples to go and feed God's people with mercy and loving kindness, and yes, on occasion, with abundant food if needed. The understory of this gospel story is that each apostle and disciple should pick up his metaphoric basket of his own gifts and talents and share them in abundance. Each disciple was to go out and teach and heal, just as Jesus had taught and shown them. And the beauty of the understory is that it is this version of the story that we too join the story. We too are commissioned to pick up our full baskets of whatever gifts we have and go out and share our abundance. One of the 5 versions of the feeding story will be my memorial service gospel reading. I love the story that Jesus has given to each of us, each is including me, to go out and feed from what we have. And then we, if we do it right, will have given enough that those to whom we serve are satisfied enough, that they feel enabled and energized enough to pick up their baskets and feed from their plenty again, and then on again, and on and on and on. We do feed the hungry from our bounty at St. Paul's. I've seen it with food drives and school supply drives, especially. It is the feeding the multitude story repeated, and it is important. What might be even more important is the habit established of doing this. Not just doing a drive and putting a period at the end of that sentence, but when it is done, we anticipate that another is in the future. A feeding with food, of course, is not the only bounty we have available to us. For me, the Thursday Bible study leadership has been a great surprise. The good news of this COVID time for me has been the feeding of each other on Thursday afternoons. We share what we have learned, what doesn't just fit right, what we don't agree with, what makes us laugh, what makes us hit our foreheads with our palms as we think or say, I never saw it that way before. It is hard to convey what a surprise this new ministry has been for me, and I think for the others too. We are feeding each other. How will this new food of new insights be distributed? And then distributed again and again, I wonder. But right now, it is wonderful to be able to be fed from this group in an entirely new way. That would not have happened except we were inside during COVID. St. Paul's wanted to provide another way to stay connected, and Zoom provided us a room to meet in that we hadn't thought to use before. As simple as that. We found a dining room, if you will, and are serving each other each week. Reverend Krista and I would like you to look at your COVID year just passed. 1 year exactly that we started closing down in this country. What has been a positive fastening to overcome the gloom of fasting of this past year for you? What has been a positive change or discovery you've made in this time of challenge? Might that be the food you can share with others so that they might be better fed? Think on it, please. What you have discovered might just be the morsel that is the blessing of bounty someone else is craving. Amen.